Hello, once again, and welcome to Compelling Conversations. My name is Steve Ramerini. I am the founder and chief visionary officer of COMPEL CEOs, and I'm also your host here on Compelling Conversations. And today we have a great guest with us, Sean Flaherty, who just got done working with 4 of our COMPEL groups this week, talking with them about great leaders and culture, and really help them and show them how to raise their game to be greater leaders, not only for their organizations, but also for their communities and all of their constituencies. So welcome, Sean. It's good
Thank
to
you,
have
Steve. It's good to be here.
Thank you. Now, in looking at what Sean has accomplished, I would say easily he is the most well-read speaker we've ever had present to our groups, and he's probably done more living in the last 30 years than people do in their entire lifetimes. Let me give you some examples. Going back to being a plane captain on aircraft carriers in war zones for Top Guns, and traveling to the Andes not once but twice via motorcycle, plus founding a software technology consultancy company with a couple of his partners that is now well over 300 people strong, among other things that I won't go into. But Sean, what brought you to talk about leadership and culture?
Well, Steve, it's a great question. I believe, I've told you this a couple times now, I believe that free market capitalism is one of the greatest forces in the history of mankind for lifting people out of poverty, and for doing good in the world. It creates the incentive systems for people to try new things, do new things, to experiment, to innovate. And, it occurred to me at some point that that's the meaning of business, is to innovate, to do things different than, and a little better than all your competitors, than everybody else out there. And when I was a kid, as you know, as we've talked about this as well, I studied computer programming. I learned to code when I was about 11 years old on a Commodore VIC-20, and I never stopped programming. I was fascinated with code and how you could understand logic to make this thing act in a certain way in the world. And I kind of stuck with that theme throughout my life. I moved from computers into studying molecular genetics in college because I wanted to understand the code of life, the code of biology, like what makes these amazing creatures like humans tick. In college, I studied Saccharomyces cerevisiae. It's basically baker's yeast. We were manipulating the genes in yeast to understand the fundamental mechanics of how life works. And as I got into business, just by dumb luck, I had this coding skill, and had gone to college for genetics. I was working for Eastman Kodak, and suddenly this thing called the internet happened, and these coding skills kind of took hold, and I went into the business world, and I realized that the most complicated part of business isn't so much making money. It's not so much whatever it is you do in the world to create the value. It's really understanding the code of how humans tick, like the code of intrinsic motivation, so to speak. So, that's been my journey essentially.
And you certainly used that very skillfully this week in delivering your message to our members. You spoke particularly about motivation and momentum and influence. What's the your favorite part of your presentation?
Right now, it's the story about Charlie, my bearded dragon.
That was a great story, by
That's
the way.
my favorite part because, he's a biological creature. He's coded. He's got a very different genetics than we do, but you see behavior. You can see sort of at a very granular level how his behaviors are programmed, like how he is programmed. When he gets something in his environment, gets him upset, he turns a different color and blows up. And you can actually see sort of these reaction modes in action. And, I love telling that story because you can see a whole bunch of things click for the leaders in the room when they see the correlations between how, one of the most basic creatures behaves and how how humans behave. you know.
That was just a fantastic analogy because, frankly, the groups have heard before about the new brain and the old brain, and they've heard it from neuroscientists like Dean Menudo and Christophe Moran, but you really delivered it in a way that made them understand it, especially the segment about how we're born to have conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And how Charlie dealt with conflict. It was hilarious, especially so. But a lot of the members told me that first off, the relationship ladder that you described, but also how we start and, we gather up steam, and truly to be a great leader, you have to be able to show caring and communication and influence in order to achieve the highest levels.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you do that day in and day out with your 300 plus people. Anything specifically that you've found more, efficient or effective than some of the other things?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to my time in the Navy because that's, the story I opened with some of your CEO groups. One of the first leadership lessons that I learned was watching a commanding officer that I had in one of my squadrons, VF 154. He would periodically come down to the line shack where I worked, and I just remember him always making sure that in any meeting he started, that he followed this sort of. He never used this mantra. I kind of came up with it by watching him, but connection before content. Like connection before content. Like he would always connect with us, ask us a few personal questions, and be genuinely interested in what was going on in our lives. I remember him specifically asking if we got our mail from the family in the mail drop, and how are things going back home, and before he got into the work. And he always got into the work. He always got into like, here's what's going on in the line check here. What barriers do you have to meeting the goals that we've set out for here, and things like that. But connection before content, like that's sort of one of my number one mantras really in life, not just in business.
It's interesting because there is a hospital chain here on Long Island. It's the largest employer on Long Island, which is Nassau and Suffolk County. It's also the largest employer in the state. And every Monday, I guess it is, they bring in several hundred new employees. And the CEO spends about 2 hours with them. And, goes around not just to shake their hands, but to give them, I guess, a little, welcome and here's what we expect. And so it very much is content, up front that they're getting. So that was a great way to start the meeting because I'm sure, there are members that are going through some trying times, and it's easy to overlook that.
For sure.
So.
Yeah.
What's been the most challenging opportunity or request that you faced in your software company?
The most challenging, project thing that we've had to accomplish? Probably, we haven't historically done a lot with robotics, and we got this one project where it's a product that's used by Apple, and it's a cutting device for the screens, for the glass that goes on the screens, and it was obviously through another company, and we had to rebuild the user interface, and we had to learn a whole bunch of new skills. But that's the key. I think if you grow your company in a way that ensures it's going to be adaptable in the future, like you build your culture around learning, around problem solving. All companies solve problems. That's like table stakes. That's why your customers come to you in theory, because you have a product or a service that will solve a problem for them. But if you rest on your laurels and you don't remain adaptable when the environment changes, or when you have an opportunity in the environment, you may not be able to pick it up and take advantage of it. So adaptability, learning, growth, I think, is what set us up for success in that scenario. So we were able to, and this has happened to our company many, many times, where we're being faced with an opportunity and a technology or a coding platform or something that we've never done before. And that's one of our special skills, is being able to pick those things up, learn, and create the infrastructure around them to make sure we can deliver predictably. It's been fun. It's a challenging environment for sure.
Absolutely, it is. We've had members in the past that have developed software for different industries. I wanted to ask you now. I know that you've won Speaker of the Year awards and Rookie of the Year awards, etc., for the presentations that you've been doing for other organizations. What's down the road for Sean?
That's a good question. I mean, ITX has gotten it's gotten legs of its own. It's going really, really well, and we have a very, very talented team of engineers and artists building great things in the world. My primary goal is still to make sure that thing lives well beyond the thing that my partners and I built lives well beyond all of us. So that's really in the short term. That's my next sort of goal. For fun, I'm headed to Iceland for another one of those motorcycle trips with my buddies.
Wow.
So we're gonna cross Iceland and do some fun things there on bikes, on adventure bikes.
I've never heard of that. I know people who've gone to Iceland to climb a glacier and camp out and see the northern lights and things of that nature, but never anyone on a motorcycle trip. So that's pretty interesting. In terms of the presentations that you do, you had told me I think you do have 14 different presentations.
Well, there's 14 distinctions in my framework. So the momentum framework is the 14 distinctions that we talked about, which in my world, in my purview, the things that I talk about, leaders need to get a handle on the language. They need to get a handle on language that's being used to describe where they're going, what they are, what's their strategy, what are their tactics, what is the culture, how do we describe the culture in a way that allows us to grow and not have it get too diffuse. How do we produce trust? How do we produce loyalty? How do we produce advocacy? The cool thing is how do we construct a vision? What is human motivation? How do we impact it? How do we interact with it? And how do we grow our skills and capabilities so that we maintain adaptability? How do we execute? So these are all important concepts, all of which are deeply impacted by the social sciences. If you understand the social science behind how to construct these things, you can become a superpower as a business leader. That's my opinion. And you can build great cultures.
That was one of the segments where I think you would have heard a pin drop, possibly. When you started to talk about the thing that separates great leaders from other leaders is their ability to communicate in the language that they use. And that is part of what makes great cultures or great societies. You also talked a lot about customers and the types of customers we all have, whether we deliver a product or a service or both. And obviously the goal is you want advocates out there. You want that customer to be more than just someone who buys stuff from you and pays their bills. But you spoke specifically about it all starts with experiences. So I hope you could share a little bit of that with us.
Well, relationships are only earned through experiences, right? So they require experiences in order to move up that relationship ladder from trust to loyalty to advocacy. And some CEOs will argue that you have to put your employees first before your customers. Focus on the employees, they'll take care of the customers. Other CEOs will argue, well, no, you have to put the customers first. And the employees exist and get their paychecks in order to serve the customers. And I think it's one of those false dichotomies. It's a binary bias. Humans are naturally creatures that like to put things in buckets. And there's literally a bias for this. And it's been well established in the social sciences that this binary bias exists, and it's false, right? So I like to use the chicken and the egg analogy. Like chicken or the egg, who do you take care of, the customers or the employees? And if you just take care of employees, if you put them first and focus on the employees, it's very hard to innovate because you're navel gazing, you're internally focused, you're not focused on how you actually solve problems and make money in the world. If you just focus on the customers and you say, oh, customer's always right, we're going to be a customer-focused organization, like, let's do that, then it's kind of toxic for the employees, and you have attrition issues, and you have people that, maybe don't feel cared for. If you don't focus on either, obviously, that means you're probably a shareholder or revenue-focused organization, and that's always toxic. The right solution, I believe, is to create a nest for the chicken and the egg. And you put them together and you think about, well, how do I create the environment where customers and employees thrive? And I believe that that's an environment where you're producing advocates, because there's no way to produce a relationship that's profound with a customer without actually having the employee invest in that customer as well. And if you remember in the session, I asked them very early on, like, what would the world look like if your customers actually authentically cared more about your employees? That's what we're doing here.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to create that nest where employees feel cared for, customers feel cared for, and they're building, they're helping you build the business together. And that's what your best customers do for you.
Right. And to me, when you brought up the topic of, you want your customers to care for your employees, and obviously your employees to care for your customers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that brings it back to, like, it's a family, or it's someone who's kind of close to me that I care about.
Yeah.
I know you went on to say that, look, you have kids, and you're going to make sure your kids are fed and housed, and you'll pay for school. And maybe you care about your neighbor's kids, but you're not going to pay for their college.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, I struggle with the business as a family analogy a little bit, because it's not. And I believe there are, if you think about the spectrum of relationship, right? You have trust, loyalty, advocacy. You have higher levels of relationship that you get into with your spouse and your children, your actual family. And I think it's very important to make sure there's a separation between people's lives. Like, they have to have a personal life and a work life. I think it's important that they also integrate well. But I don't know. I think that being more purposeful or more granular with the relationship we're talking about, like the relationship of advocacy, and creating the environment where everyone can thrive in that environment, is more important than labeling it with, like, we're a family. I like the sports analogy a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's more like a sports team. We want it to perform well. We need accountability of some sorts. We need to create the environment of accountability. And we show up as a team to deliver together, and we have a scoreboard, and business is amazing.
Well, it goes back to your core belief about capitalism.
Yeah.
I love the analogy of, you need to create a nest so that both the chicken and the egg have a place. That's great. You also stressed the need for communications, and the right communications.
Yeah.
And it goes back to your Navy days, and you gave us examples of that. What's been the best form of communication that you've employed in ITX, your software consultancy?
Communication is complicated, and there's a whole corpus of fascinating research in academia around it. Probably, let me talk about it personally, and then I'll talk about it from a business perspective. The one tool I think has been most powerful for me personally in building relationships is Shelley Gable's work on what do you do when somebody comes to you with some good news, because it's something we're never taught. And when someone comes to you with good news, you can respond in a certain way. And she's actually studied this, how people respond to positive news, and showed how most of the ways people respond to positive news actually have they degrade the relationship. There's it's a 4-quadrant model that she's got, but there's like the conversation hijacker, there's the apathetic responder that just kind of ignores it, and there's the passive responder, and then there's also this active constructive response is what she preaches. And when you actually dig in and ask questions and authentically listen and pay attention to people, that's one of the most profound ways to authentically build a relationship. Now think back to the Navy story. Like, this is one of the things Leader One did very early on in the relationship. So you instantly feel that sense of connection, and it builds trust, and it builds loyalty, and ultimately it builds advocacy. Now, on the business side, I think the most profound tool has been the constructive feedback tool that I shared with your teams. And not like how to give it or necessarily how to receive it, but how to see it. Like how to see constructive feedback. Because if you have a culture that doesn't purposefully deal with constructive feedback profoundly, it's a miss. So if you can teach your people how to look at constructive feedback as something to be reveled, to be treated like gold, to be used as a tool in the environment. Now, doesn't mean you shouldn't have a negative response to it, because when constructive feedback comes in, it's like we said, somebody's calling your baby ugly.
Mm-hmm.
We expect to go through a cycle of sorts, but we need to teach the org how to deal with it productively so we can extract the most value out of it. Because when someone takes the time to give you that constructive feedback, it's profound. It says something deep about their relationship with your organization, and you should treat it like, the gold that it is.
Right. I was just going to say it's golden. It's interesting because when we were wrapping up the meeting today, and we do this after we wrap up every meeting, is we do like a plus delta. And one of the members said to me, well, you got to turn your computer off because you had it dinging the whole time. And I immediately went to explain to him why I had to have the computer volume on. And they were like, they all jumped on me because they knew I was, going through those stages of, denial and negotiating, bargaining, and I said, no. I just told you one thing. I accept it. I cut the curve really, really down, and I'm back up here on acceptance, and we're going to make it a positive.
Funny.
But yeah, no, we try to do that. I used to do something that once a year I would call a bloodletting, so to speak, and we would go through the 5 questions of like, what's great, why is it great, what would make it better, what's not working so great, and who's going to take responsibility to make it better. And that proved to be tremendous for me because that's helped grow the groups and solidify the groups. But I'm getting a little off topic.
No problem.
I think the groups really got it when you said, like, all relationships are based on experiences, and you show them the ladder where you start with trust, but then you have to build up to get to that point of advocacy. Because I know a lot of them are taking pictures of the charts, and that was one in particular that they took pictures of.
Yeah, if you think about it, like I said, experience is where relationships grow or degrade. It's only through experience that you have the opportunity and the honor to build a relationship. And that gives you, when you see it in my chart, that when you see it, it gives you a lot of power. It gives you a lot of power because you realize every email I send, every phone call I make, every time I interact, I have an opportunity here to move the customer up or down, and it's a choice. It's a choice that I'm making in the moment. And if you could teach your people that, it's kind of a profound insight.
Yep. So, what are some of the things you like to do for enjoyment, relaxation, other than reading? Because you've quoted more books today than I
love to read. That's a problem. Well, I try to work out every day. When I'm working out, I'm always reading. When I'm driving, I'm always reading. I do love to read, largely through audiobooks these days, but I enjoy nothing more than a cup of coffee.
I was going to say, how do you manage that when you're driving? Yeah, audiobooks.
Audiobooks. There's nothing I enjoy more than a cup of coffee and a good book at home too. So, but I also snowboard in the winter, wakeboard in the summer. I just went the other day with my son. Said I like to dirt bike and adventure bike a few times a year and travel. I travel for this, quite a bit, and I always make sure to enjoy the places that I go.
Yes, that became very evident the last couple of days as you were telling us about your excursions and whatnot.
Yeah, I got to see Teddy Roosevelt's house and his gravesite, and the DNA lab over here at Cold Spring Harbor, the Learning Center. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, a lot of things that we take for granted out here. So it's good to see that someone's enjoying them. In terms of the presentations and your workshops, I know, and we didn't even touch upon this, academically you teach a course at the William Simon School. You've lectured at Harvard, I believe through the Milo program. Where do you see this going?
Yeah, I do love to teach, so I think this will probably be my retirement gig one day. Kind of sharing some of the knowledge and using it as an excuse to travel the world and see entrepreneurs. You guys are my people, you know. The chairs in particular, the folks that coach leaders and deal with the hard problems, because business is not easy.
Mm-hmm.
It's full of people problems. So yeah, so that's certainly where I'd like to go with it.
Right. Well, I think you'll have, and you'll continue to have, a very profound impact on your audiences of business owners and CEOs. We've had several speakers in the past who've run large organizations at one time or another throughout their career. And that experience lends tremendous credibility when you speak and present to the groups.
Sure.
So, please continue to do that. What's the next workshop you're working on right now?
Cognitive bias. You heard me reference
Yes.
it a couple times. I've talked about the binary bias, but I believe that if we as leaders, so first of all, let me just state that I don't think cognitive biases have to be bad things. Like, we see them as bad things because we make economic mistakes associated with them. This is what Daniel Kahneman taught us with his Nobel Prize winning work on loss aversion and how we value negative news more than we value positive news. But the reality is they're there. We have them. And if they're there, they just are. So why look at them as a bad thing? Like, let's take a look at them so that we can understand them fully. Because if we understand them fully, not only are we more likely to recognize when we're in a state where we're using a cognitive bias in a bad way, but we could also look at our systems as leaders and try to figure out, how do we make sure that that's not happening to our people, or at least leverage them in a way that's productive for our organization. Particularly with business leaders, I've been studying this for a while, and there are 4 key cognitive biases that compound when you think about leadership behaviors, like the herding bias, the authority bias, right? The normative bias. Anyway, and there's probably more, but they compound. So if you think about the effects that a cognitive bias has on behavior, when you as a leader behave, everybody's watching you. They watch what you do way more than they watch what you say or listen to what you say. They watch you and they mimic. Like, human beings are mimicry machines. And these are cognitive biases that cause this mimicking to occur. So you need to be hyper aware of these things in your people as a leader, because you need to know that whatever you do, they're going to do. Monkey see, monkey do. It's real. It's legit. There's science behind it. So when I share that science, I think it's going to become a profound workshop.
And that also came out in your description of how you can identify an advocate in your customer base. One of the things was that they help you innovate, or they innovate with you.
For sure.
They mirror your behaviors. So that sounds like a very, very interesting topic, and I could tell already that that's going to be very helpful for a lot of the business owners out there, because they start out in business, or they inherit and come into a family business, and there are a lot of biases that they've already got working.
Inherit them.
Right? They either inherit them, or they've got them before they start the business, and then they have to, the good ones, I think, will unconsciously maybe recognize them, or someone who they trust and appreciate will give them advice, like, you sure you want to do that? And but they won't, realize that there are probably many other things that are falling into this cognitive bias realm that they have to take care of. So,
Agreed.
Well, any last words of wisdom that you'd like to leave us with?
It's been an incredible week here in Long Island, Steve. I really appreciate you bringing me in to interact with your people, your leaders. No, I think we shared quite a bit. There's a lot there. I don't have any pearls of wisdom that extend beyond the work that I'm doing. So,
well, it was great Um, they got so much content. And by the way, I take notes to remind the members when they ask me a question. And this was one of the longer note takings that I have in terms of number of pages. And I didn't even write up all of your graphs that you showed us and depictions, but I think every member came away with the same belief or feeling that they've heard a lot of this before, but putting it in like a mathematical framework really was impactful for them. And then tying it in all to the science that you've read up on it and you've studied. That was that really drove the points home. So
thank you. Like I said, the logic is important to me. Like, it's got to logically make sense. And if you can visually see it, in addition to understanding where it comes from, it's like a 1-2 combination. Can't unsee it.
You did a great job on the visuals, I have to tell you. So, Sean, thank you very much. Continued success. And we're looking forward to you coming back in the not too distant future to continue to share with us your wisdom and your perspective on this world that we live in, and especially on leadership. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And until next time, that's it for this episode of Compelling Conversations.